Okay, thanks very much to Donegal Local Development this morning for asking me, Liam Scanlon, to come on and talk to you this morning about company member guarantee, the role and responsibilities of directors, which we'll do over the next while this morning. So just to give you some idea of what we're going to cover, I knowing that you're coming this morning from a broad range of backgrounds, and I wouldn't mind if everybody would mute, please, just during the presentation, because we can hear that coming across on the recording. Thank you. So being a leader is possibly one topic, because if you're director of a company with a guarantee, then being a leader is part of that. Strategic context, what I mean by that is that if you're involved in a charity or company, or someone involved in delivery of some sort of a strategy, some sort of a plan, and that also has impact on your role as a director, quite apart from any governance or anything like that. And what is a CLG director? So for instance, I often would differentiate, if you like, the role of a director normally and the general adherence to governance in the following way, that, if you wanted to go from Mallinhead to Cork, knowing how to get there and driving a car or bus or whatever, that's the main job, is to actually get there. Along the way, you need to obey the rules of the road. So it's like that, like the strategic direction of a company, the strategic context, leading a group of people, that's getting from Mallinhead to Cork. The fact that you drive on the right-hand side of the road is governance. That you keep along. So we shouldn't, as governance is terribly important, it's fundamentally important that we actually behave as good leaders and good directors. So it's just kind of a thing there. So we will cover governance, members and directors, and breaking down what those different things mean. Key officer roles like chairperson, secretary, treasurer, things like that. Implications probably coming up of the Charities Amendments Bill 2022, which may come into law later this year and will have implications for directors of CLGs that are charities, as well as obviously charities themselves. Issues that come up in boards and groups, like managing conflict. What's an effective board of directors? And then maybe some helpful links and templates. So that's just generally to give you a sense there of the sort of topics we might cover. Now, there's an awful lot in that, and I suspect some of it is more relevant than others, so I don't want to second guess. So I'm going to do the first thing this morning, which is maybe that we should go into groups of maybe 4 or something, and we'll paste in those questions into the breakout room chat box to sort of look at maybe in a group choosing what are the top 3 of those headings that you would want to cover. So that's just like the agenda for today. So we might do that. So what I'm going to do is just ask Margaret to stop the recording, and we might come back in the inside YouTube. Okay, so welcome back from your groups. And as I say, you all looked at those sort of main topics, the 9 possible topics. And what I heard back from you was you're very interested in being, a level of interest in what is leadership about, being the role of a company director, governance, the roles of chairperson, secretary, the Charities Amendments Bill, problems with boards, what is an effective board? And I've just been responding to you on a number of points around unincorporated bodies, the difference between company secretary and a normal secretary, succession. So we'll actually go into some of the presentation, and I'm going to sort of just delay on some that I feel you've come up with, and I might stop at the end of something to take questions from you and things like that as well. And maybe if one of my people, maybe Margaret, if you're able to look in chat box just in case there's comments, because I'm just not able to get it, and I'm able to get in, but just it'll save time if I can run on. I think somebody's looking, they can't hear me, but I think it's because it's a problem on the other end. So just very briefly, this is by way of leadership. There's just something a little bit general for people in terms of leadership, motivation, that kind of thing. So very much to beginners, and I'll go through this fairly quickly because it's not been the main drift of your issue. But when we come in and we get bamboozled by governance, one of the things we need to remember is that we're on our board or we're on this organization for a purpose, to help our community survive or thrive, or to help people with a disability of some sort, or to, you know, to help people out of homelessness, and that's what wakes us up in the morning. That's why we're there. And all I'll say at that slide is, it's so important to remind yourself of why you're there, and that's bigger than the governance in terms of motivation, because that's what you go back to and remind yourself of that. What you do, the job descriptions, how you do it, that's almost secondary to why you're actually there. And very often we can have so much governance that we lose sight of the thing. So I thought I'd say that because we're going to be talking a lot about governance, because that's what you're going to do. Leadership. So just again, it's something I'm very interested in. It's something I've experienced of a lot, and I can give practical examples sometimes of this. So being a leader is there's a different take on it. It doesn't mean the person who comes up with all the ideas, leads the charge. Maybe you can. That's a certain type of leader. But the type of leader in not-for-profits is normally not that. It can be, first of all, you have to be aware in yourself, aware of your triggers, aware of what upsets you, aware of other people. Because if you're not going to pick up triggers in a group. You're not going to pick up what's going on. You also need to be embedded in the group. The group needs to function for you, and you need to be interested that the group is functioning as well for itself, and aware of its needs, and being able to sort of pick up on those needs and respond to them. And I don't mean being the chairperson of the group, I mean being any member of the group. And also you need to be aware of how that group relates to the outside. What is our purpose? What is our main objective? Are we standing up for that objective? So that sort of thing of being present. And it's sort of another chart there just to help you along with some of this is intentional leadership, because we'll come to the role of chairperson and treasurer and secretary. They're all leadership roles, but you can have all the governance in the world and still be bad in these roles. So just to give you a brief explanation there, it requires that level of self-awareness. And that means that you have a presence, you know, you're present to people. I want to give you just an example of that. For 11 years, I was a CEO of Ireland West Airport. And I probably have as many, if not more, examples of my bad leadership in that period as the good ones. But I will pick one that fits in with this. There was one day in which there was a catastrophic delay of an aircraft. I won't go into more detail than that. It was just a catastrophic. It made the RTE news the next day, for example. And had gone home, and I'd realized there are people still in the airport waiting for that to come in. And I knew that the people behind the desk, the check-in, and all these people were going to be getting very, very bad hassle. So I knew this was really serious. The delay had been 5-6 hours. I probably wasn't going to turn up. I went in, I got in the car and went in, and I went behind the desk. I haven't a clue about how to check in people or check them out or check them up. But I went there as if I was and sat among them and walked among them to hear the people shouting across the desk, abusive language. And I took on the role of a check-in person and responded to these people with the people there. They also responded. It wasn't that they needed my help. They were well able to do that, well capable, more than me, because they were more used to that. But it showed them that I was there for them. I was in amongst them. I was aware. I was turning up. I was part of that group at a critical time. So that leadership didn't mean that I was going to know what the vision for Knock Airport was in the next 10 years. That didn't matter. What mattered was turning up in yourself. So that sort of thing. Empowering others so that you're not full of your own ego. You're there to help others be strong. A leader's part makes other people feel strong. And connection, you know, to to know how we connect with the outside world. What is our purpose? Are we there to help people who are homeless? What is my connection with that? How do I work with that? So all of those things put together trust, inner authority, empowerment, and that they are the deep qualities of leadership. Now you're getting in one slide, which people can spend a year learning. But just again, before we come to the formal boards that you're on, the sort of deeper stuff, the stuff that makes it work in the first place, but does relate to governance. And it's a bit like I said, it's if you're going from Malin Head to Cork, which I mentioned just on the outset, as some of you will have mentioned, missed if you came in later. If you go from Malin Head to Cork, the important thing is that you know how to drive to get there, and you're bringing the whole group with you on the bus. And that's more important than, well, it's not more important. It's equally important to knowing the rules of the road, which is governance. So it's important to know your goals, that everyone around you is committed to it, that actually the goals of the organization are not just there for the founders and the people who are the traditional leaders. Everyone has a role. The young guy from Portugal who's come in has a role. There's something to do, and that there's a togetherness in the group, and that often happens really well in a new group, but doesn't in as group develops. Effective decision making, that is clear at the end of a meeting. What was the decision? And we talk about company secretary. One of the key roles of a company secretary is the decision is clear, and that at the end of it, they check with the chairperson, was that what was decided? Was that what was going to be acted on? The distributed leadership is not just down to the chairperson. The chairperson is encouraging everybody else to be a leader as well. As groups develop and get older, the old linking together and working nicely together and getting to know each other for the first time, like some of you did in this morning breakout rooms. If you were together for 3 years, that changes because you're going to have different points of view, different priorities, and that can be a challenge. And that you're able to communicate your ideas. So there's just generally just some of the broad issues of governance and leadership. So, if you can just stop share for a second, or stop. You see the screen again? Okay, so just leading on from that, if you're in an organization, it's important that you have a vision. And when I say have a vision, I don't mean a dream or anything like that. Something. What benefit are you going to bring to the people you're serving? That's what the vision is: to set goals and to be able to evaluate these goals. And that's literally what this is about. But I'm going to skip that because it wasn't your main emphasis, and I'm not going to cover that, and I'm not going to go into that in great detail, and I'm not going to go into that unless you want me to. So I'm going to go straight to company limited by guarantee. The main components. And we might stop after some segment. I'll tell you, Margaret, when we are, so that you can be able to stop recording. So just look at it first of all. What is it that you're a director of? What are the main components of the company in the first place? And we talked earlier about a constitution. So to break down all the legal jargon, a constitution has 5 or 6 main elements for which you as a director are responsible. First of all, you have objects. And another word for that is a purpose. What is the main purpose? To relieve poverty, to create employment, whatever that is. To do those objects, you have to have powers to take loans, to rent premises, to pay money, to get money. There are long lists of them. The Constitution also sets how you call meetings, how regularly, how you behave around them. And secondly, or next, there is members. So members and directors are often confused. Members are that broad base of membership. The number of people who are, members of the club, members of the community council, 200, 300 people could be members. Members of the golf club, anything. But those members then appoint directors. And they're delegating those decisions to the directors. So therefore, a company limited by guarantee has a company director. That's where you come from. You're minding these objects. You're in charge of these objects. You're responsible to the members, but now you're carrying out the actions. And if you're a bigger body, you as directors will then appoint staff and people. So generally speaking, that's the bones of any constitution. So it is a simple thing. It's a logical thing. And as I said, under the charities regulator, on the guidance for charities, you can actually pick up a draft CLG constitution and a draft unincorporated constitution. And that the CLG one is useful because if you have an old body and you're wondering, are we fit for purpose as a constitution, you can have a look at that. And the main, just to go into a little bit into them, the main objects has subsidiary objects. So in other words, if my main object is to relieve animal cruelty, one of my subsidiary objects might be to set up a dog's home for dogs or for stray dogs. What I mustn't have in my main object is an object that's so narrow that if I change it, if I suddenly decide, so if my main purpose was to set up a dog's charity by building homes for stray dogs, that may sound right, but that could change. I might decide that the best way of doing it is not building a home for them, but actually farming them out to different hosts. So you don't want your main object to be changing, or even your subsidiary objects. You need to word them in such a fashion that they're meaningful, but that they don't change too rapidly. Because changing your constitution, especially if you're a trust, is a laborious exercise in terms of approvals that you need to get. Meetings, calling meetings. So generally speaking, you'll be calling meetings. Those are the sort of things you'll be calling. The annual general meeting, a meeting of members. Ordinary meetings of members. Rules about notification. Is it 2 weeks notification? What's a quora? What is my quora for calling meetings? So how many people makes a valid committee, a decision? What matters reserved? In other words, what issues does the members decide? What issues do the directors decide but cannot decide because the members decide? And what issues are delegated by the board to the staff? And what's our conduct like? How do we behave? So that's a bit about meetings. Members. So members are prescribed. So if you're a company limited by guarantee, there are different rules, but the normal rule here, and I'll come to it later, would be really, and I'm differing from the slide, there 2 in a company and 3 in a CLG. So you have rules that members can decide at an AGM. They have voting rights. At an AGM, they can change the constitution. They can determine the directors, and they can appoint auditors. So those are reserved functions for members. And they sometimes need, and it will be in a constitution, a 2/3 majority to change a constitution or to make a major decision like that. And it usually has that rule. There also should be a register of members, which can contain the names and addresses of each member, the date at which they entered, the date at which they ceased being a member. So I'll carry on with this slide here and just finish this segment really and come back in the room. The duties of a company director, the main duties and responsibilities. So that's updated there. The minimum number 2 and 3 if you're a trust. So effectively a lot of you are trusts this morning. So effectively you need 3 trustees. I want to say a bit about trustees, directors, members, because they interchange and they can cause confusion. A director is normally what is referred to as a company director of a company limited by guarantee. So you have a legal responsibility. If you're a trustee, you're more or less a company director of a trust, except the charities regulator calls you a trustee. You're more or less the same thing. If you're a member of a committee that's unincorporated, yeah, that's just a member. You're just a member. You're not a company director. You're not a trustee. You're just a member. But just one thing to say on that. Suppose you have a committee of 10 people running the animal charity, let's say. And 6 of you are registered as trustees. And 4, turn up to meetings. They just didn't happen to register trustees. They're there in meetings and they behave like everybody else in the meeting. They're making decisions, things like that. The charities regulator recognizes those 4 as formally as trustees with the same responsibilities, even if they're not registered. So that's just something to point out in terms of a detail there that can slip. And what are you responsible for? Your control, direction, management of the organization. You're responsible for that constitution, basically, and for keeping it within the bounds of that constitution. You're responsible for its performance. When I say performance, I mean how it achieves the objects set out in the constitution. And that it is run in accordance with the constitution. That there's retirement by rotation every 3 years and so forth. You can delegate authority but not responsibility. You can delegate tasks but not responsibility. In other words, the company director is responsible. The trustee is responsible. You are responsible for the governance of the organization. So ignorance isn't an excuse. If you're a director of a company and you haven't been at any meetings and you don't know what's happening and something comes up next year and the company's been held liable for a mistake it made, you are equally responsible, even if you weren't at the meeting. So you are responsible and you cannot delegate or avoid that responsibility other than resigning. So I'll come back to that. So what are the actual duties? So these are, if you like, not guidance. These are actually formally legal duties. I can separate that later in terms of these are must-dos. They are in the Act. So you must act. You must not have a conflict of interest or a conflict of loyalty. You must act if you're a member of, you know, if you, for instance, represent an interest group on your company, let's say you're a tenants, a housing body, and you are a tenant representing the tenants. When you're on the housing company, the housing agency, you are 100% responsible for the housing agency's decisions. And you must be able to bring your objectivity to those decisions outside of your role as a tenant. So you must actively, obviously, honestly and responsibly act in respect of the Constitution, not use company property for your own use. These are obvious enough. To exercise, allow everyone to exercise independent judgment. I recently had a case whereby one of the directors, happened to be the treasurer of a company, was deciding that only he could decide on matters of finance because he was a treasurer. Wrong. Everybody is responsible for the finance of the company as a director. And again, ignorance is not an excuse. I was doing a board evaluation recently where people say, we can't understand the actual reports, the financial reports, but there's 2 people on the board that has a really good understanding of them. Again, not good governance. It's the responsibility of the organization to present financial reports that are readable by everybody so that everybody can take part in the decision. Maybe some people know more than others, but at least you must know a certain level. Obviously, avoid conflicts of interest, due diligence and care. For instance, if you're recruiting volunteers, recruiting people, taking on new projects, that they come well crafted and well justified, that they're worthy of decision. So have regards to the interests of members as well as employees. So I'm going to come back in the room now. Or maybe there's just somebody. So, first of all, if you are a non-incorporated body thinking of becoming a company limited by guarantee, you really also going to become a charity. Why is that? Because under the Charities Amendment Bill, any organization behaving like a charity must become a charity. So that's just to clear that up. So what you're seeing now are the duties of a charity trustee. So to answer that question, here's exactly what you would be doing. You obviously have to comply with whatever your constitution is. And that trumps everything, by the way. If there's something in your constitution that's not, anyway, you know, it trumps every other agreement. That you're behaving charitably as regards your public benefit. That you act in the best interest, that you act with reasonable skill and care. That you manage the assets of the charity, that you don't overexpose the charity financially. Therefore, you have good financial reports. Make appropriate investment decisions where there's new buildings, new vehicles, whatever that is. And you must be registered with the Charities Regulator, 2009. That you keep proper books of account, that you keep proper accounts, that you furnish accounts as necessary to the Charities Regulator. Here's the key one. Many of the existing charities will know this. The Charities Regulator has a very precise way in which you perform accountably. And that is through the 36 up to 46 different procedures that you need to follow and assure the regulator that you do follow them at the end of every reporting year. And you don't give the form to the charity, but you fill it in and you keep it on file. And so if you're becoming a charity, your best way of looking at what really is involved is going onto the Charities Regulator website, looking for a compliance record form and downloading it and having a look at the sort of questions that as a trustee, you would be answering. And obviously against fraud. So that sums up the sort of 13 different duties of a trustee. And I won't break out in the room. And that code that I talked about is that governance code, which we don't have the time to go into today, but it's those 6 different codes break into 36 or so different procedures that you need to follow. And that is what you're in charge, that whether you're a company director or whether you are a charity, that is what you must have good governance, and that's how it's defined. And the CRF defines what that good governance is, that compliance record form. It more lays it out for you almost as a document. So look, I'll go very briefly through the role of chairperson and secretary and treasurer. So first of all, the chairperson leads the board, smooth running of meetings, acts as a figurehead. I'm going to go through this very quickly just to give you a sense of this, and then we'll stop. So we might only run over 15 minutes. And I'll take questions at the very end. More on the chairperson. The key one there is that you summarize the decisions at the end of the meeting, that they're very clear, that the secretary knows what to record. They are the chairperson is the person who interacts with the staff. So if another board member is approaching a staff or a volunteer and telling them how to mow the grass, that's wrong, unless the chairperson has delegated that function. So the chairperson is the person who works with the CEO or the manager, and the manager is the person who works with the rest of the staff. If something other than that is happening, there needs to be a board decision for that to happen. That's good practice. It's not necessarily the law, but it's good practice. So the company secretary formally is a compulsory role, and compulsorily those are what's involved in a company secretary. That first question we had is the difference between a company secretary and a company secretary. So that's the first company secretary. And the register of members, all of these things are important. Again, what you must do is, as a company limited by guarantee, that's just a checklist of the sort of forms that you'd need to be filling if you're a company secretary, acting as a company secretary. Now, a company secretary, the duties of a company secretary can be undertaken by your auditor, by your accountant, by other people. But as a board member, you are responsible to make sure these things are done. I won't go into the detail there, but just to know there's a checklist of things there. So here's the other company secretary that I put in lowercase. It's not quite as important. So you will end up doing all of that. You'll end up doing anything if it's delegated by the board, so it's not, there are no hard and fast rules to it, really. Depends on how strong you are and say, no, I'm not going to do that. You should do that. But it ends up, I would have thought also the logical place for a company secretary is also a key role in the compliance record form if you're a charity. Treasurer. So again, the role there. So again, a lot of people are appointed treasurer on a nod. They've been here 10 years, they should be given a post. Wrong. So if you're a treasurer, you need to be able to hold them accountable to these sorts of functions. And they're just some of the thresholds that are coming up under the Charities Amendments Bill in terms of, when you need to submit accounts, when you don't, and the larger thresholds for SORP. I will skip that because that's about a PRO and we're not covering that necessarily today, but if you have a PRO role, that's just a checklist for that. I'm just going to very briefly hit on the Charities Amendments Bill. And basically what that says, it actually necessarily doesn't change anything that the regulator, the governance code. What it does is it gives more powers and more immediate powers to the charities regulator. They can now take it to the district court or circuit court, or could do after the Charity Amendments Bill becomes law. They can take a charity off the charities register. They can remove trustees off being a trustee and disqualify you from being a trustee of any other organisation without having to go to the High Court. They can do it through a much faster process. They are entitled to have your name and address and details, a mobile number as a trustee under the new law, not now, but under the new widening net. And as I say, if you're a company limited by guarantee, they will be fixing those thresholds under the new Act. And they can, as I say, impose sanctions. They can behave a little bit like the Health and Safety Authority, the HICWA, for instance. It says, if there's something is wrong, they prepare an inspector's report. You must obey that inspector's report within a certain period of time, etc., unless you have some very, very valid excuses, that type of stuff. I answered a question this earlier on about conflict of interest. Again, just the definition of it is there. A declaration form, if that person owns a supermarket, that is a conflict of interest in this particular case. Minor enough one, if what I hear you say, but still one. Board effectiveness. I see that this come up in the thing. What is a competent board? Okay, very briefly. When you look at board effectiveness, you look at 5 things. How do the meetings flow and how do the group get on, the soft stuff? As if the committee's doing the right things with very clear terms of reference. Is it operating to a strategy and key goals? If a board isn't interrogating the strategy of a company at least twice a year in terms of is it achieving its main goals, then it's not doing its major function. If it's too involved in operational performance, it needs to track it, it needs to evaluate it. But if it's too engaged in it and asking questions like, who mowed the grass last week? And why did the mower break down? It's in the wrong space. Obviously, compliance, just what we're talking about. So that's an effective board. What is a competent board? It's a board that has the people with the knowledge and skills and perspective to do the function. What do I mean by knowledge? I mean, knowledge means that you're familiar with accounts, but you mightn't be trained in them. But you might do your accounts at home. You just know about how to add. You know what makes a profit and what makes a loss. You understand the basic thing. Skills is you could perform it at a slightly higher level. You could do bookkeeping. Perspective is a different thing. It means you're bringing a perspective to the main board of decision. For instance, as a disabled person, as an ethnic minority, as a woman, as a man, all those things. And people would say, well, should we have our staff and volunteers? They've got, some of them have disabilities and we understand disability. The point about board perspective is that the perspective needs to sit at the board, not to sort of, if I'm a disabled person on a board, I'm not there to tell them how to access a building for disabled people. They should know that. I'm there to tell them about how they run the strategy as well. I have that perspective, but I'm coming at that perspective as a person that has other challenges. I won't go through that. They're just checklists of what is the knowledge, what is the skills that you might checklist for, apart from the current ones for yourself. What are the sort of perspectives that I need to bring to a board? Where are the people who are generally not on the board because with these perspectives? Have we gaps? Have we issues in those areas? Strong agenda, board meetings, just that didn't come up really. So it's just there in the pack for you, links and templates. And I'm going to stop share now. So maybe we might